Hi, this is the Baseless Speculation podcast with Spartacus and Dylan. And what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about the new GeForce announcement from NVIDIA on their 2000 series. And so, what we're going to do is very briefly go through their lineup, but our idea is not to touch on that in any meaningful depth because you can go elsewhere to get those basic specs. What we're really going to do is talk about some reasonable speculation in some areas where we don't have confirmations from an official entity like NVIDIA quite yet. So, after touching on some confirmed information, we'll talk about mobile lineup implications for this RTX 2000 series, as well as a potential die shrink to 7 nanometers, marketing implications, and other factors. So, with respect to the lineup, to very briefly recap, NVIDIA announced 3 graphics cards today at Gamescom. So, they've got the RTX 2070, the RTX 2080, and the RTX 2080 Ti. And so, those are 3 graphics cards. They got a pretty decent little lineup where starting at the 2070, we've got a single 8-pin design. Then at the 2080, a 6 plus 8-pin design, and the 2080 Ti, a dual 8-pin design. So they're really covering the gamut of that performance sector. As you'd expect, the FP32 units will increase. Clocks changed a little bit, all that fun stuff. You can go find that where you need to find that. In addition, there's some other things with respect to tensor units. Dylan, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So I don't think so. Jensen claimed that Turing SMs can run FP32 and INT32 shading simultaneously, resulting in 1.5x shading performance. Now, I don't know if that's part of the tensor cores themselves, but one thing that is really interesting is that they did decide to include the tensor cores in the consumer lineup. And additionally, a departure from Pascal where they gimped the lower precision performance so as not to eat into the Tesla market share. They've actually allowed the tensor cores to operate at full power. So there's what is it, something like 200 teraflops of FP32, and there's all those specs that you can find elsewhere. So that's 2 really interesting things about the architecture, is that they decided to keep that full lower precision performance. The other thing is they added these ray tracing cores, and so the tensor cores and ray tracing cores won't be too useful for your standard gaming, but NVIDIA is trying to move beyond just standard gaming. I think their high end currently already can serve the high end gaming market. They're looking forward to future innovations in the gaming market. So I think you wanted to talk a little bit more about the Founders Edition and then the mobile lineup.
Right, absolutely. For those, as you said, while they're looking towards the future, the Founders Edition still takes care of gamers today. And so the Founders Edition saw some interesting changes in this new lineup. In particular, we've got new coolers. So these are more of open cooler designs with 2 fans rather than a single fan blower. And so that's a big change, closer in line to what we see on the custom options that tend to be shipping the majority of cards today. They're also pre-overclocked, which is strange since they are coming from NVIDIA. And because of that, the TDPs are 10 watts higher. So whereas it was 175 watts for the 2070, 215 for the 2080, and 250 for the 2080 Ti, all of those are 10 watts higher. So we get 185, 225, 260 on those Founders Edition TDPs. And then, as you'd expect, the prices are around $100 to $200 higher. One interesting potential implication of that could affect the mobile lineup. And I'm most fascinated by that pre-overclocking, or factory overclocking, so to speak, because the clocks are meaningfully higher than what I guess we'll call stock. And historically, I think this affects mobile to the extent that with Pascal, we saw a lineup on the mobile side that very, very closely mimicked the desktop options. So what I mean is the mobile 1080 and the desktop 1080 were effectively the same in that their clock ranges were the same. Their, the enabled units on the GPU were the same, same VRAM, all that fun stuff. Really, the only difference is the mobile 1080 had a lower power limit, closer to, I believe, about 150 watts rather than about 180 watts on the desktop option. And so that was a big deal. Normally, mobile options have lower clocks than the desktop variants. Now it looks like NVIDIA is positioning themselves to have their cake and eat it too, where they want to be able to say the de facto clocks on the desktop are going to be what they're technically calling factory overclocked clocks, whereas the stock clocks are materially lower. And so that makes it much easier for the mobile lineup to hit quote unquote stock desktop clocks. But functionally, they probably won't. You won't see those stock clocks on most shipping desktop cards, including the Founders Edition. And so that's an interesting thing that I had noticed, and I'm wondering why NVIDIA would do that, because these GPUs didn't get enormously bigger. They did get bigger, but not egregiously so. And so the one thing that I'm thinking about is historically, with Pascal and previous releases, the top GPU to make it into mobile was, I'll call it the 104 type GPU. So like a GM204 in the GTX 1080 or 980, a GP104 in the GTX 1080, that sort of thing, where it's not quite the top tier GPU, it's the GPU chip immediately below that can get into mobile. And there's a couple reasons for that. It's a smaller chip. It's got fewer memory packages that need to fit on the board, other things like that. And I'm wondering if we might see the 2080 Ti on mobile. So the first time we see kind of a 102 type GPU or a 100 type GPU making it onto mobile in a meaningful sense. I'm not sure if it's going to be able to fit on an MXM style form factor, kind of that, that being the removable form factor for laptops on GPUs. Not though, I don't know if that's really that big of an issue anymore, because I don't see a lot of gamers really bothering to upgrade their to really utilize that MXM upgradability and upgrade their laptops GPUs. That really doesn't happen a whole lot anymore. So because of that, and because of these potentially lower clocks, we might see a 2080 Ti on mobile. However, that's a big GPU, and it's a lot of power. It's a lot, it's tough to take 250 watts and bring that down to somewhere around maybe 150 to fit into a mobile form factor. And so, you might also need something like 7 nanometer. And Dylan, I think you had some interesting thoughts on what 7 nanometer might be for Turing.
Yeah, definitely. So you pointed out how they've been using the 104 class GPU as their highest end mobile. So this generation, the RTX 2080 is the TU 104-400A, and the 2080 Ti is the TU 102-300A. The 2070, there's not concrete information out there on that yet. It could potentially be, a TU 106 GPU, which is unprecedented. But I'm not sure about that. There's not enough information out there. It's probably just the TU 104 cut down. even though the 2080 is already a cut down TU104 with one SM disabled. But as you mentioned, the 2080 Ti, if it wanted to fit into mobile, it would have to be on 7 nanometer. I don't think a 250 watt GPU that's 750 millimeters squared could possibly fit in any reasonably sized laptop. I mean, I'm sure Asus will make some like 20-pound monstrosity, but for the most part, I don't think it would fit in there. So there is something interesting about those code names. I'm going to repeat them again: TU104-300A and TU104-400A. For people that don't follow these code names too closely, these are pretty unprecedented, is what I'll say. For one, there isn't a TU100 chip, and because the TU102 is already 754 millimeters squared, I don't think they will make a TU100 chip, at least yet. But based on that code name, there's that inclusion of the A, and that's really odd, let's say, because the last time they included that A on a GPU name was all the way back in the GTX 2080 days, where that GPU was called the GT200-300-A2. So that's the last time they included that A. And what happened to that GPU? Less than a year later, I think it was about 8 or 9 months, they launched the GTX 285, which was the GTX 280 die shrunk, slightly higher clocks. I think that might have even had slightly faster memory speeds, but I'm not sure on that one. But that one was called the GT200-350-B3. So I think it's quite possible, based on this odd, unprecedented, at least for the last near decade, name for the GPU, that there's going to be a 7 nanometer shrink, and there's going to be a TU102-350B or a TU104-450B, where these are the ones that make it into mobile laptops. And they might not be too far out, considering there's a lot of speculation that NVIDIA actually delayed this launch a few months because of high Pascal stocks from crypto crash. So additionally, I wanted to talk a little bit about why they don't have a TU100 yet. And that's because, well, one, the TU102 is at reticle limit almost at 750 millimeters squared. And then they also have that TU102 at the Quadro announcement. They quoted floating point 32 performance, 16, int 8, int 4, but they didn't quote FP64, which is what the 100 class GPU always has, except for the exception of Maxwell. So, it's possible that they're waiting for 7 nanometer to shrink these GPUs and fit them in a mobile form factor, while also coming out with that TU100 that finally replaces Volta, which is almost, it's getting how old, a year and a half now? That monster GPU. So that's my thoughts on a possible 7 nanometer shrink. The other thing I wanted to talk about was, what NVIDIA is doing with their marketing. I think it's quite ingenious. Yeah, you can talk about how expensive these cards are. And, TU102 is a 750 millimeter square chip, and it's really expensive. I get that, and I get why people are complaining. And same with the 104 GPUs. They're big, but they're also expensive. And people are looking at that expensive part way more because they've been waiting so long for new GPUs. And they kind of point to, there's no competition, so they're just going to jack up these prices. All that. But what NVIDIA is doing to combat this is really smart, I think. They're not quoting the floating point 32 performance like they used to. In fact, I don't think I've seen it much besides maybe 1 or 2 slides. What they are quoting is some, interesting other, let's call them specs. One, if you watch the presentation, you saw Jensen just screaming about gigaarrays. He's like, what? 10 gigaarrays? And he kept saying that, 10 gigaarrays, 10 gigaarrays, 10 gigaarrays. He's putting this into people's mind that, our GPU has 10 gigaarrays. I'm talking about the 2080 Ti. Whereas you go look at Pascal, something like 1 or 2. You go look at Vega, it's like probably similar range, maybe a little bit higher. But, this is something like a 10x, 8x improvement over previous generation cards. And he's making people think that, even though in terms of single precision flops, the 2080 Ti is not that much faster than the 1080 Ti. additionally, they're talking about, int 32 and yeah. So the 1080 Ti is 11.3 teraflops in single precision, whereas the 2080 Ti is 13.4. That's the percent increase is less than the price increase, which is something that people are pointing out is very negative. But with this marketing, they're not talking about single precision flops. They're talking about tensor performance. 440 teraops of int 4, or 220 of int 8, or 120 of FP16, or they're talking about their ray tracing 10 gigarrays, or they're talking about RTX ops. I don't know what those even are. I guess they're ray tracing operations, but they're not the same as gigarrays. They're 78 ray tracing ops, 78 tera ray tracing ops. These are numbers and metrics that we've never heard of, and they're redefining what a GPU is with all their brand new forms of anti-aliasing and inserting neural networks to super sample and render certain things, and ray tracing for shadows and global illumination, and all these features that games simply don't have right now, besides the maybe 20 or so that they came out and announced with, such as Battlefield 4 and a couple other ones like Metro Last Light. And I'm not going to name all the game names, but it's really interesting that they're not talking about the traditional metric for gaming performance, which has been single precision performance, or the memory bus, the memory bandwidth. They're talking about these new metrics that they've created that make everyone feel like their current GPU is obsolete, and that they need to go out there and buy this 18.6 billion transistor, 750 millimeter squared monster die for $1,200 or $1,000. It's really good marketing. Can't lie. I mean, we see that maybe we should focus on these older metrics, but at the same time, we see that we should look forward and see what the future is about.
Dylan, do you think NVIDIA is taking that opportunity to kind of change that discussion and initiate that paradigm shift, because they kind of caught AMD in a dead year for their lineup? Or do you think this was their plan all along, and even if AMD had a suitable lineup, that they would be doing that anyway?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think maybe they wouldn't have thrown as many ray tracing units onto the die for their consumer lineup if AMD was competitive. But they still, for the past few years, they've been, since probably 2013, they've been pushing AI. And, every GTC, that's mostly, they talk about their, big Teslas, their big $10,000 Teslas, but they've been talking about how it can come into gaming. And, even you can go back to earnings calls almost a year ago. Actually, I think it was his Q4 2017 earnings call, where Jensen talked about, where some analysts asked him about Tensor and coming to gaming. And he basically said, yeah, they will be coming to gaming. He had a bit more nuanced answer than that, and how it's useful for certain things. But I think it's pretty clear that NVIDIA has been looking this direction for a while. I think they might have not gone as heavy on the ray tracing and the Tensor, but this is the future of the company and of gaming. I mean, they don't talk about their gaming technology near as much as they talk about ray tracing and AI and how that's changing everything. That's the growth engine of the company, after all, is the AI and data center. And, of course, gaming is still the biggest unit, but that's the growth engine.
Very cool. Very cool.
So I think we're done here. Do you have anything else you wanted to talk about, Spartacus?
I think that's about it for me. It was great talking with you.
It was great talking to you as well.